good to see you. We shared a couple years at St. Joseph's University. My first years here the United States, and it was a great experience for me to the time that I passed in the Institute for Jewish Catholic Relations in the Department of Theology at St. Joseph's University. I learned a lot. I had really, now looking back on this experience, I feel that I was in the midst of a very good, maybe that I can say a high level of working in the Jewish Catholic dialogue.
Yeah, we were blessed to have you there.
International
It was wonderful for you to be with us, to learn, I mean, much from you and to learn with you. So thank you.
Adam, your dissertation thesis in order to get your PhD that afterwards you transformed in a book has as a title, Building on the Ruins of the Temple, Apologetics and Polemics in Early Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. So, since the very beginning of your career as an historian, because this is an historical analysis, you chose the relationship, the analysis of the relationship between Jews and Christians. Afterwards, you specialize in the Catholic world. But what moved you to take such decision as an historian? Because what you did, from what you did, we can learn something that it's very, very clear. You study as an historian some subject that at the end has projections, has teachings for the present, from present problems. I suppose that the great Joseph Klausner, the great historian of the second Commonwealth, the era of the Jewish Commonwealth, or the time of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, so that he studied, that he specialized himself on this topic, because he was, as you know, a great nationalist. He lived in Israel, and he was a great Zionist. So, but not Zionist after the establishment of the State of Israel. Before he arrived in Israel at the very beginnings of the 20th century. So the same I can say regarding your work on the relationships between Christianity and Judaism. What moved you to
well, I mean, it's a good starting place, because my interests have shifted quite dramatically over time, at least historically or chronologically, but in many ways have remained similar. My entree to this topic was through Jewish studies, a topic I became interested in an academic and historical sense, though obviously a personal connection in college. And one of the things that I focused a lot on was the relationship in the Second Temple period, the period of the rabbis in the New Testament, was the relationship between these two groups, which especially on the Christian side, sort of defined themselves against each other. And so the study of the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, to speak very broadly, is, at least in the early period, a very contentious one. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of polemic, as I quote, as you said from the quotation of the title of my book. I started with conflict, and over time have moved away, at least in my research, to the moved from the period of late antiquity to the contemporary period, let's say the last half century or so, in which the terrible relationship that marked the emergence of rabbinic Judaism and especially Gentile Christianity, which defined itself in many ways against Judaism, that bad relationship in the past has begun to be repaired in the present. And I find that to be a very heartening shift. What's fascinating about it is that there are hundreds, if not thousands of years between the period of antiquity and the present, but at the same time, there's a lot of continuity. And so the issues that were difficult, contentious between Jews and Christians in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, the topics haven't entirely changed. And so I began for my dissertation research to focus on the city of Jerusalem, the temple, and the way in which that was a focal point for Jewish and Christian identity, and in a largely sort of combative sense. They responded to its destruction very differently. And the topic of Jerusalem and the land of Israel, that remains a lively subject for discussion between contemporary Jews and Christians. The past isn't so distant, though I like to think that the way we approach it is in a remarkably different spirit. I mean, you know as well as anybody the depths of the relationship that have emerged between Jews and Christians in the last few decades, in the wake of the Shoah, in the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. There's been an attempt to break with that past, to break with that period that I began my studies with, and find a new way of interacting, a new way of understanding the other, to shape new relationships, and from a historical point of view, to rethink much of that history. I think we have new insights into these topics because we have new perspectives in the present. And I can say more about that, but I think the way in which we have changed our relationship affects how we understand the past.
You developed a great way in your work, because besides to be an associated professor, you are also the associate director of the Institute for Jewish Catholic Relations, which is a great institution. You are producing a lot. You are in touch with many people here at the United States, and also especially abroad, and you are working very, very seriously. I know that because I was part, and I feel that I continue being part of the institute.
We do too.
But my question is now, after all that was done, as you emphasized in your answer, your first answer, since the days of the Shoah, especially since the days after the Shoah, and especially after Nostra Aetate, where are we really standing on in our days in this dialogue? From time to time, we see that there are all kind of clashes, all kind of, I would say, skirmishes, not big clashes, thanks God, because the wish from both sides is to build up a new reality. But how far we advance in this construction? Where are we standing really, on our days? I will tell you, I will add some very important detail to my question, which is that when I ask many of the other interview personalities about this question, the Catholic theologians, very important people, Pawlikowski, Mary Boyce, all of them agreed with me that we are standing on the threshold, that we made a few first steps. We are at the beginning of the way. What's your opinion?
Out of largely out of the shock of the Shoah, but also the emergence of modernity and ideas of tolerance, the Western religious groups, Catholics, Protestants, came to a very important realization, which is that the way in which they defined themselves in opposition to Jews and Judaism was not acceptable, above all on moral grounds, but I think also historical grounds, that the relationship historically was a much more mixed relationship, positive, negative. In the present, I do think that there is much to celebrate. I do think that while there's work to be done, and I'll come back to that in a moment, I do think it's important to recognize the dramatic shift that's taken place in Christian theology regarding Jews and Judaism, and regarding, relatedly, the New Testament, Jesus' Jewishness, Paul, to sort of critically evaluate that history and those claims. That is to sort of ask, what does it mean that Jews are still around for a long time? Christians sort of were puzzled by that. There's been a sort of expression of gratitude in the diversity of the existence of our different religious traditions. The most problematic parts of our relationship, the nasty ways of talking, the historical ideas of Jews as Christ killers, Jews as rejected by God, there's been admirable progress in moving past or rejecting those really terrible claims by Christians. In some ways, it's sort of low-hanging fruit, right? You won't hear Western, American, European Christian preachers would almost never speak from the pulpit about a Jews' responsibility for killing Jesus across the generations. That sort of stuff has largely been eliminated, with certain exceptions. And so there has been a very heartening shift, and it takes a lot of rethinking the nature of Christianity. The Catholic Church, for example, is sort of like an ocean liner. Its pivots take a while. Its shift of 180 degrees on these sorts of topics takes some time. but there's been a consistent support, really at all levels. I'll speak about the Catholic community at all levels, both internationally and nationally, to cultivate relationships with Judaism, with Jews and Judaism, with a positive view of Judaism, to engage in dialogue, to support dialogue. I was involved in a dialogue between Jews and Catholics, two national groups, earlier this week, and so there's a real commitment to this. And I would say, importantly, on the Jewish side, I think that there's been, and it's not as broad as it should be, but I think there's been an openness to rethinking our views of the other, but particularly of Christianity, which historically has been the source of linked with great suffering among Jews. I've for years, had to explain sometimes to well-educated Jews that Catholics don't missionize directly among Jews anymore. That's in the past. That Christian groups have affirmed vitality of the Jewish relationship with God, the Jewish covenant. Those are significant improvements, and I think it's important for Jews to not bear false witness, to not misrepresent other religious traditions, what they think, what they say about Jews, and I think that there's been a growing awareness that among the Jews that such a relationship can be a positive one, that there can be real change, that there can be real improvement. I find that very hopeful. That being said, there are, of course, issues that remain difficult or contentious. Most prominently would be the land and state of Israel. There has been a lot of difficult discussion, disagreement, and I don't mean at the political level. I mean religiously, or in a setting in which there's a discussion of theology about the wide sort of gap between how Jews and Christians relate to that place, relate to the history of the place, and also the present reality. That's been a very difficult topic, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I could say more about that, but I just want to sort of flag that as one of the issues that has been especially hard, because certainly for Jews, there is widely a broad attachment to the state of Israel, the existence of the state, the people who live there. Right? Many of us have relatives, friends. It's not an abstract concept, but rather a reality that is both heartening and also personal. That there has been a kind of it's been challenging for Christians to sort of figure out what Jewish sovereignty means. What does it mean that Jews are not a minority? The idea of Jews being, in some sense, sort of fulfilling a promise of theirs, which is to return to the land of Israel. So it's a theme throughout the Bible, right? In periods of exile, you see this consistently, that Jews speak of return and have for millennia. It's been difficult for us to sort of negotiate our different ways of seeing this, and often prompts anger. And there's not an easy way through it, but it does deserve continued attention, especially among friends. And that's how I think of my Christian colleagues and friends, fellow scholars, clergy. Is I think we're largely doing this as friends with a commitment to the interests of the other, to be sensitive to what it is that's important to the other community, and that has to be sort of the bedrock of any of these discussions. And I'm heartened to say that I think that's largely true, certainly in America, and Europe is that we relate as friends. We relate even in times of difficulty, and certainly in the Catholic-Jewish relationship, there's been sort of bumps in the road. Nonetheless, I think that foundation of trust has been built up and provides some reason for optimism for the future, since there'll be road bumps most certainly coming again.
So I conclude from your answer that really were done great steps, even though that the steps are a few steps, that the way that we have to continue is to continue ahead is also a very long way, but that as these were the first steps, they were the most important in this process and the most difficult to change the mind, to declare, as in Nostra Aetate appears, that we cannot blame the Jews for the killing of Jesus. And after such a dark history that we had regarding this point, this phrase, the killing of Jesus by Jews, really a few steps, but very substantial, very important steps, that the situation shifted to move to another reality. So how can we continue walking? How and where to? What is possible to do in this, I would say, in this very difficult reality in which we are living nowadays, with the terrible war in Ukraine, that had to do a lot with the past. From this war, we must learn that we cannot erase the past from one day to the other, and not only through documents. The documents are very, very important, but the documents are no more than letters, and we have to give to those letters spirit. We have two concepts: the letter and the spirit of the letter. And through our actions, we have to give spirit to the letter, to Nostra Aetate, and to all the documents and all the new concepts that the people and nations are declaring, that they are identified with. So really, the Ukraine war is a result, ultimately, as the very long historical expansionist ideas of Russia. Russia must be an empire. Russia is the mother Russia over other countries. So in such a reality in which we can see clearly, dramatically, because thousands of people are being killed in Ukraine, and the rise of anti-Semitism throughout the world, even here in the United States. So what is the mission of our dialogue? From one side, how to improve our dialogue, how to go ahead and where to. And we know on the other side that through our dialogue, we can make an important influence on our neighbors. for the societies in which we are formed part of them.
I mean, I think the point about thinking in terms of our neighbors is actually really significant, because relationships matter. We know that in the 1960s, the greatest advocates for Nostra Aetate were American bishops who came from cities where there were large communities of Jews and Catholics. And it remains important today for these, documents, teachings, etc., to be produced, but at the same time for people to interact. And so, I mean, I can say, certainly on the agenda of the institute that I co-direct, we reach out and have programming for high school students, programs for the public. We bring clergy together into religious settings, and that makes a big difference. It deepens the impact of the idea. Images matter. The image of Francis at the Western Wall, or you and the Imam, sort of walking with him in that holy space, and John Paul II at the wall years earlier. Those images are worth as much as any collection of these organizational statements. They're very powerful in shifting people's understanding, and it is really important for the changes to trickle down, and that almost sort of minimizes it, and not trickle down, but to sort of be kind of actively presented. And I'm heartened. I work with friends in the church, and this is true, I should say, on both Protestant and Catholic sides, but efforts to provide teaching resources, educational resources, to see that the arena where change really takes hold is not among scholars or clergy foremost, but among communities and among people, especially those who are different. And so the idea of sort of people transcending their differences, and particularly to have substantive interactions. We really have tried to do that at the Institute. I've done that in a number of settings in my career, because that takes it out of the sort of ether. It takes it, these ideas become real. I want to follow up. Hang on one sec. That being said, the sort of counterpart to that is there's a need for scholars, theologians, academics to sort of work through these difficult issues. We had a conference that the university hosted, that I was organized with my friend and colleague, Dr. Phil Cunningham, who's also a specialist in Jewish Christian relations and a Catholic. We organized a conference a few months ago on the significance of Jesus's Jewishness. This is a complicated topic because, to sort of summarize the challenge that was presented most directly in a recent book by a woman named by a scholar named Barbara Meyer, is that as Jesus looks more like a Jew, he looks less like what became a Christian, which was sort of eventually Gentile religious movement separate from Judaism. These are complicated questions. They're not directly relevant, at least not yet, to the public. They're sort of in the background, and so I think it's important to have academic discussions, efforts to sort of begin to work through some of these issues. And this is true for Judaism and Christianity alike when talking about claims of covenant, ideas of the relationship with God, how these traditions speak about others, speak about difference. Many of these are quite nuanced and complex topics. They undergird much of what sort of happens in a community. Eventually, these ideas sort of make it there. And it's, I think, an interesting contrast between the deicide charge, the claim that the Jews killed Jesus, killed the divinely sent divine Messiah. That's on its face. I would say most of us here then are just kind of shocked that the idea that Jews would be eternally responsible for that event, passed down from generation to generation, just, I think, strikes, really strikes anyone as being kind of ludicrous and unfair, right? We don't think of bad deeds being passed down generation to generation in some sort of deep way, and with the awareness of the long history of that idea, Christians just said, this is absurd, this is ridiculous, and you really don't hear that type of crazy, sort of preaching anymore. There's accusations of that kind, and what's left are the more complex, they're more it's not sort of sophisticated issues that remain, and that's a good thing. But there are, as I said, things that are still being worked out, and I alluded to some of them, but that remains to be done. And it's not quite as directly relevant to the pews the way that some of those earlier changes were. But I do think that over time, they too will help Jews and Christians alike to sort of rethink the relationship between the religions and to rethink more serious issues about sort of how we think of those who aren't like us.
One of the phrases that you said that made me or triggered in me all kind of thoughts was when you said that when you talk about the importance of the actions, to do things like Pope Francis with Omar Abud, the Muslim professor in Argentina, and how the embracement of the three of us in front of the Kotel, Kotel Amaravi, the wall that surrounded the rest of the wall that surrounded the temple. In Argentina, appeared an article in one of the most important newspapers, a photo showing the picture, and the subtitle of the picture was a photo that speaks more than 1,000 words. And this is very important because I remember in many conferences, lessons, activities at the Rabbinical Seminary in Buenos Aires about the dialogue. At the end of the activities, used to approach to me people telling me, everything we heard here is very nice, sounds so good, but these are words among you, the heads of the congregations, of the communities. How is this message going down to the basis of the communities, to the simple people? And this is a great point. And I suppose, I understand that many of the things that Bergoglio did together with me, the Pope Francis, when he was Archbishop in the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and afterwards as Pope, were symbols, actions that work like a paradigm. Look, more than declarations, more than everything, we are together. We are talking. We are developing a dialogue. He speaks more through actions, very symbolical actions, than to words.
Yeah.
And this moves me also to emphasize something very important that you and our good friend Phil Cunningham, Professor Phil Cunningham, did at St. Joseph's University, which is the statue that you work to be performed, and which is now just in front of the chapel of the university, in which we can see how the Catholic Church is in dialogue with Judaism, with the Jewish people. How because each person who enters now, and I dream that forever to St. Joseph's University, because it's very close to the entrance, will learn a lesson from the stones. There are stones talking to the person that are passing by in front of them. So how was this idea, and how it's that you came to the conclusion we have to build such a statue?
Well, I mean, so the visuals are so important, and symbols are important. I mean, so the challenge for us in preparing some form of visual representation of the changed relationship between Catholics and Jews was to take ideas that Phil and I usually encounter in written form and to put them in visual form. And we worked closely with a local sculptor and focused on this idea of a kind of reversal of an image found throughout medieval churches, a very powerful image of these two female figures, one symbolizing the church, regal, proud, standing with a spear, a staff of power, and a crown, and the Jewish figure also found in these churches, but sort of beaten down, kind of eyes downcast, carrying a broken staff. Sometimes the crown on her head having fallen off. And we thought, this is a very powerful and widespread image in European art. It's ripe for rethinking and reversal, and therefore it was a very sort of powerful symbol that could be sort of turned on its head, if that's the right expression, by presenting the two figures as of equal dignity. The point about symbols that you make is actually, this. Let me, if I could, just talk about the visits of the last two popes to the Western Wall. Over 100 years ago, when Theodor Herzl went to speak with the Pope at the time in 1901, I believe, the Pope responded to Herzl's request for support for Zionism by saying, "We can't support Zionism. We are are not going to help you in any way. All we want to do, to summarize, is we are simply committed to converting you to Christianity. Underneath the Pope's statement, as recounted by Herzl, is this idea that Jews are not meant to return to the land of Israel. They're punished with exile. And so the symbol, the image, the visual of the Pope Francis or John Paul II being at the Western Wall requires a lot of rethinking of the theological ideas that led the Pope in 1901 to make such a negative statement about Jews in the land of Israel. And so, symbols go along with deep rethinking, with a sort of reconsideration of the ideas has to happen for the symbols to be activated, for them to have the power that they do. And that visit to the Kotel is a good example, a good illustration of the rethinking that has happened in that 100 years that made it possible for a Pope to stand there as a positive thing.
I would like to add to your words before thanking you for your kindness, for this conversation. We talk a lot during the last years, but this is being recorded and other people can share that. So for helping us to perform this document, because it is a document, it's our thinking, our way of thinking. I would like to remind two things related to your last words. Phil Cunningham, in the meeting of the International Council of Christians and Jews in Rome, 2015 could be, it was 2008. Okay,
yeah.
then he was the speaker, but the message was of both of you. Told me exactly, he told me the Pope is going to overnight at the Borromeo's monastery,
right,
which is 1.5 miles from our university.
Right.
We prepared some brochure, some papers with all the information about the statue. Ask him, beg him to come and to bless the statue. And he did that despite that it was out of the program. This was something that the spokesman of the Vatican opened 2 hours before the moment in which he came to St. Joseph's University and blessed this statue.
Yeah.
And this created a whole mass there, but it was great. And this is a great one of the 2 great gestures of Francis regarding the dialogue.
Yeah.
The second great gesture was, and now I go back to your last commentaries about Herzl with the Pope and the answer of the Pope to Theodore Herzl. On the visit of Francis, of pilgrimage, let us use the exact word, of Pope Francis to the Holy Land, he did something that was that not other popes did in their pilgrimages to the Holy Land. He was the first one to go and pay honors to Theo, putting flowers on a stone, and a gesture to stand and through his silence, because he uses a lot in a lot of moments the silence as a transcendental message that he is giving, or a prayer that he is praying, standing in front of Herzl's tomb. On one side, Netanyahu, on the other side, Peres, a couple meters from him. I was standing there together with our friend, our Muslim friend from Argentina. This is also an image that talks more than 1,000 words.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly powerful because it's not a natural stop on a pilgrimage, right? I mean, to Jews, of course, the grave of Herzl is a symbol of the contemporary. It's a symbol of the state sovereignty. It's not a religious site that someone would naturally go to if they were a Christian, or for that matter, a Jew. And so I think you're right. I think that is very powerful and worth singling out. I also should offer my appreciation to the great work you did in pulling the visit together for us, in sort of behind the scenes, encouraging Francis to do something meaningful, dramatic, and frankly very unexpected for a man who had very little time in Philadelphia and a lot to do. The university, myself and Phil, are really appreciative that was pulled off. It was a real highlight, and I know you did a lot in the background to make that possible, and I'm certainly appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of the time that you spent with us at the university in general. I learned much from you and with you, and it was a really rich experience. So I express my appreciation for a couple of things, Avi, for both before you were around and when you were around.
And I very appreciate the friendship that we could develop between us. Look, we can talk much more about Herzl, who Herzl was and remains in the Jewish conception. Of course, he was not a religious Jew. He was a Jewish politician. He tried to find out a solution to the bad situation of the Jews in Europe. And he is considered the father of the political Zionism, because Zionism is not only a politics, it's also the hope, the religious, the mystical hope of the Jewish people. You know, just one little, or not so little, but more detail in order to conclude. Herzl was so in the eyes of religious people as a new Messiah figure, some kind of Messiah figure. Religious people, when Herzl visited Israel, I read that they saw in him as a person that God sent in order to bring some redemption for Jewish people. Adam, thank you a lot, and best regards for Rachel, for the kids, and enjoy the bat mitzvah of your elder daughter, your Bechira, as appears in the Bible, in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks.
And thanks again.
Sure. It was wonderful to speak with you as well. Thanks for inviting me. I'm honored to be part of the conversation.